baby fell asleep, so we have to do a little exchange here. We'll see if he stays. Oh, he's waking up.
So yeah, my name's Michael. I am her husband, if you didn't know that. We have a child. We have 3 children. I'm the director of a Bible college in Kauai. And so when Katie and Allie were working on putting this conference together, Katie approached me and said, like, hey, we're thinking about maybe having you speak on a certain topic. Do you think you'd be okay with that? I was like, okay, what's the topic? Yeah, sure, I can do that. And then she kind of looks at me. She was like, well, are you going to be okay to do it? Like it's going to be all girls. Are you going to be okay with that? And I'm kind of like, you just asked me. Like, I didn't come to you. Like, hey, let me speak at your conference. You just came to me. What do I have to justify here? And she's like, well, why do you think that you'll be able to relate to girls and stuff like that? Because you're not one. And I'm like, well, that's obvious. But, I mean, I have a mom, right? And I have a sister. I kind of spent most of my life growing up with her. And I know you. We're married, and we have some children, so we relate sometimes. And my middle child's a daughter, so I'm like, look, I know at least 4 girls, right? It'll be okay. And then, like I said, at the Bible college, I'm the director. We usually have like 70 to 80% female students. And so, like this particular semester, we're a little bit smaller school because we're missions focused, and we go on a month-long missions trip every semester. Shameless plug, ccbckauai.com. But anyways, the students that have come in, I've got 7 girls and 4 guys, and 3 staff girls. So there's going to be 15 of us. 11 female. I'm like, I can relate. I have to do it every single day anyway. So she's like, okay, well, let's see. But the topic that they gave me today was the storm of self-worth. And then she again said, are you sure going to be able to relate to that? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she goes, well, look at you. You don't care what anybody thinks about you. How are you going to relate to people that actually care, that have this issue of like, well, people think this. You don't care. Look at your hair. Look at everything. Like, you're going out there with a baby strap. I was going to teach with the baby strap to me. I don't care. Like, it's my baby. It's fine. But she said, are you going to be able to relate to that? And I said, I think it'll be okay. Like, you know, I am a human. There are some things that I struggle with before too. So she said, okay, let's see what it is. So you guys will find out. But the way that my mind works, when I like to talk about something or teach about something, I really like to break everything apart. And so today we're talking about the storm of self-worth. And so I want to talk about the storm, what the storm is, and kind of go through that, and then talk about worth and how it comes together, and then how to deal with it, and all that fun stuff. Another thing you may notice about me, and you'll notice it more as I go on, is I speak a little bit fast, but if you just listen really quick, we'll all be okay. So you've got 2 ears, I've got 1 mouth, you'll be all right, I promise. The students get used to it, you guys will too. So storm, talking about a storm, what's a storm? And so I got this buddy named Google. I said, hey Google, what's a storm? And Google was like, a storm? No. Google tells me that a storm is a very violent uprising in the atmosphere, generally accompanied by rain and heavy winds and sometimes snow and hail and things like that. And I'm like, okay, a storm. Everybody knows what a storm is like. You guys, you live in California. You've seen at least 3 storms in your lives. You know, it rains every once in a while here. I actually grew up in Northern California, so I know what that's like. You know, it's wintertime. You enjoy all 3 weeks of it. It's amazing. Now I live in Hawaii, where I enjoy all half a day of the winter. But when you think of a storm, you've got normal weather, and then you've got this storm. You've got this gnarly stuff that's going on. I'm like, okay, that's what a storm is. Everybody knows that. How does a storm affect us, though? How does a storm affect us? Not the worth thing, but just a storm in itself. And if you think about a storm, how does it affect you? What does it do? Well, you know, us as people, we've got these different senses, right? We've got a nose that helps us smell. We got eyes that let us see. We can hear things. We can feel things. We use our senses to make reality in our lives. What a storm does is it jacks with your senses. Your sense of hearing gets all messed up because it's raining really loud or it's thundering. Okay, no shame. Who of you are like the scaredy thunder people? Like thunder comes and you're like hiding under something. You know you're out there, and if you're not raising your hand, the person next to you is like, come on, be serious. You got the sense of hearing, but your hearing's getting messed up. It's really windy, it's really rainy, the thunder's happening, and that's freaking you out. You're in your house, you know that you're safe, but just the sound of it scares you. Or what about sight? What does it do to our sense of sight? Well, any of you ever driven in a really gnarly downpour? You're like, we're from California, what is that? No. But when you drive and the rain is coming down and it's nuts and your windshield wipers are going like that and you're like trying to follow with them because like that's the only gap that you see the hair, don't even care what it's looking like. You're like trying to follow the gap to figure out, okay, where can I see kind of thing. It messes with you. Or even like your sense of feeling. If you've ever been caught out in a storm and you're trying to move around and it starts getting cold and you start losing feeling in your hands and you can't really grab things as tightly. The other thing that the storm does, it takes all your senses, it messes them up, up. And again, what do we do with our senses? That's how we make sense of reality. Well, if your senses are getting jacked with, reality is going to get jacked with. And so you start making poor decisions, like when you're driving. That's why, again, I'm not shaming you. I grew up in Northern California. I know what it's like. When the winter comes and the first rain comes, just car accident, car accident, car accident. My wife's from the Seattle area. They're like, what is wrong with these people? They can't drive in the rain. I'm like, we don't see the rain. That's just like not what we're used to. But that's what happens with the storm. It messes up a normal situation. You're just driving home or walking home or whatever it is. It can mess all that up. So we've got the storm. Store that away. Now we're going to go to worth. What do we do when we talk about worth? The best way for me to describe what worth is, now this may come to a shock to some of you guys, fast talker, all that. I used to be a car salesman, okay? And used to be a car salesman. And there's this thing that happens. Sometimes people come to buy a car and they want to trade in their old car. And that's always a really awkward situation because it's basically somebody saying, here, take my piece of junk, but give me a lot of money for it. And you're sitting there going like, no, buy my really shiny, nice thing, and I guess I'll take that off your hands. That's just so you guys know, for my car dealer people out there, it's a rough deal. And one of my favorite things to tell people when it's like, okay, look, we'll give you $3,000 for your car. And they're like, oh, $3,000? This is like a $9,000 car, man, blah, blah. And you're like, really? Would you pay $9,000 for your car? No. Why not? Because it's not worth it. Exactly. The way you know what something is worth, the value, it's what somebody is maybe willing to pay for it. Like this bottle of water that I have right here. This is like $1 bottle of water, right? Depending on the circumstance. Here it was free. I got it out of the green room. Because when you're a fly like me, you get to hang out in the green room. Not really. I'm in the nursery with the kid changing them and stuff. But free bottle of water can turn into $1 bottle of water. You walk out there, you get thirsty. How many of you guys have ever been to an amusement park where you're like standing in the line and it's super hot at, I don't know, what do you have down here? Six Flags or Marine World or whatever it is, Disneyland, and you're sitting there and you're in the hot line and your fast pass isn't working, fast pass, and you're just standing there, but then there's a vending machine and there's the water, and you're like, I know that's $1 bottle of water, but it says 6, but I'm paying it because that's what it's worth to you at that moment. Or if you were in the desert and you were like about to die, you'd be giving whatever you could to get that water. It's worth what you're willing to pay for it. But worth carries more than that. It's not just what you're willing to pay monetarily, big word for with money, with cash, with stack, It's not what you're willing to pay for something necessarily with money, but it could be, worth can be what you're willing to put your time into or your effort into. Again, we live in Hawaii. There's a lot of physical things you can do. There's a lot of hikes and stuff like that. There's one particular hike on the north shore of our island. That means North Shore in Hawaiian Sign Language. On the north shore of our island, and it's a hike to a place called Hanakapiai. And it takes 2 miles to get there, and you're doing a whole lot of this. And usually after about the first quarter mile, most people go, that is not worth it. But then you keep going and going and going, and then you get to this beach. And you're like, yes, I made it to the beach. And then they go, yeah, but you still have 2 more miles to the waterfall. And you're like, dang it, but I'm going to do it. And then you hike the 2 more miles, and you get there, and 2 plus 2 is good. We might get interactive up in here. It's not going to get any harder than that, though. I'm just judging the caliber of the audience. I'll bring it down a notch. So you've got a 4 mile in, 4 mile out, 8 miles. Is it worth it? If you've been to the waterfall, you know that it's worth it. If you haven't been to the waterfall, you're like, I'm not so sure. But the effort can be worth it depending on what you know is at the end. So it could be monetarily, what's something worth? What am I going to pay for it? It could be, is the effort worth getting to something? Or it could be like the effort given in a relationship. How many of you guys are in a relationship? Doesn't mean boyfriend, girlfriend. I don't want to even talk about all that gushy stuff. But you have a sister, you have a mom. How many of you are in a relationship where it's a little bit difficult at times? Anybody? Look, all the hands come up. Everybody's afraid of thunder now. Okay, those relationships, they're worth it. They're worth putting the time in. They're worth putting the effort in. They're worth the late nights, listening to them tell you all the stuff that's wrong that you've already told them the answer, like stop dating him. And you're like, okay. But it's worth it because it's a friendship. So worth can be, valued in different ways. What you're going to pay, the effort that you're putting forth physically, or maybe just the effort emotionally that you're putting into something. Now let's put the two together. What's a storm of self-worth? Well, if a storm was something that is messing with your senses to alter your reality, and worth is knowing self-worth, talking about self-worth would be knowing what your value is, the storm of self-worth would be not understanding your value because something is changing your perspective on things. And so that's what I want to talk about today. What is it that gives us our view of self-worth? Now, we've talked about it earlier a little bit. Kayla was talking about all the social media and how, the magazines, and she's throwing stuff everywhere. And by the way, when you're the only dude at an all-girls conference, there's things you can't get away with. There's some stuff she said, if I did it, they'd be like, we will never invite him again, They say it, and it's like, everyone's like, oh, yeah, poop your pants. Like, come on, man, I can't do that. I want to talk about some of the other ones, you know, like I can't tell you what, you know, my sense of the most exciting, passionate thing I'm about. If I said the same she did, wouldn't work out. If you guys remember the couch and the ice cream and the no pants and stuff. Anyways, okay. I digress. I got to get back, right? That's where my mind goes. When she said that, I was like, I can't say stuff like that, but I think I just did. So edit when we get to the video. Anyways. What's messing with our view of our own self-worth? That's what we want to be able to talk about today. What's changing those things? And I think this is what the storm of self-worth is. It's not understanding what our value is. It's putting our value in other things, like social media, like what the magazines tell you, like what movies tell you. It's putting them in all those types of things like that. And the thing about worth is you need to be qualified to determine if something actually has value or not. Like, go back to the car situation thing. You wouldn't just go on the street and say, like, hey, what's my trade-in worth? Like, no, because I work in the auto industry and I sell new cars every day and bring in old cars every single day, I kind of have a really good idea what that thing is worth. The person that wants to hike to Hanakapiai and they do the first 8th mile, they're like, this sucks. This isn't worth it. Have you ever been to the end? No. How do you know it's not worth it? You don't actually have intimate knowledge of what we're going toward. Or you're talking to your friend. How many of you guys have this situation? You've got 2 friends. Anybody have 2 friends? Get more. It's sad. There's so many ladies. You can have at least 3 or 4. I'm just kidding. So any of you guys that have at least 2 friends, one of them you're really, really good friends with, the other one you're really, really good friends with, but when you put them together, they're always like, why are you friends with that person? They're like weird. I don't understand them. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay. The deal with that is you intimately understand this person, and you understand this person, and you know it's worth it with this person, with their little quirks, and it's worth it with this person, with their little quirks. But these people, it's like a friend triangle, right? And it's not working because they're like, this isn't worth it. This sucks. Why do you even talk to them? Did you go on that hike? That hike sucked too. And you're like, dang it, you never saw it. That's the kind of deal. They don't understand the other person. They don't understand that it's worth it, but you do. So you need to be able to try to explain it. And sometimes that's worked out. You kind of like, hey, no, you guys, you just need to understand where the other person's coming from, and they do it, and then they become friends, and then everybody's happy, and now you're sitting next to each other. That's fun too. But again, the deal with worth is certain people aren't qualified to determine certain values. Monetarily, are you an expert on that product or whatever? Friendship-wise, do you know who that person is? So who's not qualified to do it? Somebody that doesn't know the person. Somebody that has never been to the end of the hike. How many of you ladies like surfing? Any ladies up in here like surfing? Guess what? I'm the guy that I'm like, that is not worth it. Like, I've tried it a few times. I enjoy my nipples not hurting, and like, no, surfing is not worth it. But guess what I've never done? I've never like caught a barrel. I've never stood up for more than like half a second on a surfboard. I'm not really qualified to tell you like surfing's just totally not worth it. But I've said it, right? So if that's who's not qualified, you're not qualified if you don't have the info. You're not qualified if you've never actually done it. Who is qualified? Well, the only person qualified to give worth or value to something is somebody that has to be an expert in it. And we're talking about self-worth. So the only person qualified to tell you who you're worth, it's definitely not going to be people that have no idea who you are, like the people on the other side of Instagram, or the people that are writing those magazines, or the editors of those magazines or the movies and the things that they're saying, this is what you should do. They have no idea who you are. They're not qualified to tell you what your worth is. The only one qualified to tell you what you're worth is the one that created you. That's God. And so that's going to be the main deal of what we're going to talk about today. But first, I want to keep going with this whole storm of self-worth and paint the picture, and then we can like rip the picture up because it's a gross picture. But the reason the storm of self-worth happens is, again, you've got all these things going on. They cloud your mind, and you start believing a lie. You start believing that your value is determined on circumstances. And it could be different types of circumstances. Maybe your circumstance is going to be your job. Your job determines your worth. If you're working at Subway, you don't have much worth. If you're like owning a Subway in New York, then you've got a lot of worth. Not like the station, like the trains and stuff, you know. If maybe not just jobs, maybe it's your appearance. Like that's what Kayla was talking about. Your appearance and your self-image. If your self-image isn't great, if you don't think that you look nice, if you actually care what your hair looks like and stuff like that, you're going to have issues because it's never going to be perfect enough, right? But those are all temporary circumstances. So it could be money, how much money you have. Well, if I had more money, then I would actually be a more valuable person and I would have worth. If I had a better job, then I would actually have worth. If I had a strong relationship, if I had a boyfriend, there's no guys here, so I don't even have to say girlfriend. If I had a boyfriend or if I had a husband, then I would have worth. You're a little bit older. Like my wife was 27 when we got married, and she's just like, at that point, well, I'm not getting married, right? Because who's going to find me now? Like all the little 20-year-olds are out there, and why wouldn't they just grab one of those? Where's the worth? So you tie those things up. What's my worth? Well, it's dependent on my economic status. It's dependent on my job. It's dependent on my relationships. It's dependent on my friendships. It's dependent on my number of followers on Facebook or whatever it is. I hate social media, and so Snaptagram or whatever you kids use these days. Anyways, All those things, if you're using those to determine your worth, you know what you're doing is you're getting caught in the storm. You're not looking at things, you're not looking at reality anymore. You're now caught in the storm. And the thunder's happening, and the rain's beating down, and the winds are going, and you're allowing that to completely screw up your perspective of who you really are. And who are you letting determine what your worth is? People that aren't qualified. The ones that have no idea who you are. God knows who you are. That's why I like that Kayla said, like, God's completely obsessed with me. He is. You know why? Because he made you and he knows everything about you. He knows your heart. He knows who you are. He doesn't care about your circumstances. As I said earlier, it's not about the outward appearance that God looks at, because we'd all be hosed on that one, right? Like, we know what we look like. It's what's going on the inside. It's the soul. I love what she said. We're not a body, we're a soul, and we happen to have a body. And different one of us, we all have different bodies and things like that, you know? But that's the big storm that we have with self-worth. You don't really, you're looking at it from the outside perspective, you're looking at it from the wrong perspective, and you're just listening to a big lie. And that big lie that you're listening to, understand it. If you're here and you're listening to this lie, understand that's what it is. If you believe my worth is connected to anything, doesn't matter what it is. If you think your worth is connected to anything other than God's view of you, you're being lied to. And you're believing that lie. And my voice starts breaking because, again, I look at the sea of girls out there and I think of a mom, and I know the things that she was willing to do to try to gain worth and how that damaged her. I think of a sister, and I know, growing up watching her, the things that she did to try to determine that she was valuable. Get your master's degree, education. Get a great job, money. Become a San Francisco 49ers cheerleader at the age of 30 when you're like a grandmother compared to all the other girls that are like 18. On a whim, I'm going to try out just to see if I can do it. You do it. Doing all of those types of things to try to gain worth. And every time you hit that next plateau, guess what? There's another one to climb. There's another one to try to find. I've seen it. I told you guys, not the one that was shocked to me. That's my son, Micah. He's not going to care what his hair looks like either. But I got a little girl, Shiloh. She's almost 3 years old. And she cares what she looks like when I dress her in the morning. She's like, no, the pink one. I'm like, what? They're all the pink one. Which pink one do you want? You know, I want the pink tank top with the purple leopard print, whatever here. Just wear what you're doing. So she dresses herself now. But again, I start getting a little bit weepy all about it. Again, I don't care what you think. I'll weep if I want. I get that way because I understand the pain that people go through. I've dealt with it myself, not as a female, obviously, but I've dealt with that pain myself. I know what it's like to go, I'm not worth anything. I know what it's like to have parents that divorce when you're 4, never really feel love when you're growing up, end up, long story short, moving in with your dad, who your whole family knows is abusive and you really shouldn't be living with, calling your mom on the phone and saying, hey, you need to bring me home or I'm going to end my life, and her saying, I can't because you and your stepdad fight too much and it just stresses me out. Guess how much worth you think you have at that moment? If your worth is attached to how much your mom loves you or attached to how much your dad loves you or how much anything else in the world other than who God knows you are, you're going to have a low amount of self-worth. And that's just a great lie. You've bought into the lie. If you think about it, we see it all the time. We see movie stars, we see athletes, we see politicians, we see people that run these big corporations that have all the money in the world, right? They look great because they can pay to make themselves look great, you know, little snip, snip, cut, cut kind of stuff. They look all nice. They get whatever they want. They can buy whatever they want. They can, you know, take selfies with monkeys and stuff like that. They can do whatever they want in life. But what happens? How happy are these people genuinely? How much worth do they think they have? And what do they have to continue to do to put themselves in the spotlight? One of the things that I think is amazing about Bethany, and what I was so excited when my wife started working with the organization, is to see a girl, and I can say a girl because I'm like 32, I'm an old man, to see a girl that for over 10 years has stayed really in the spotlight in Hollywood without being nasty. Like, if you understand what it takes, I mean, let's think about people that when Bethany got shark bit, you know, age 13, let's think about who was famous at that time. And let's think of who's still famous now and what they've had to do to keep themselves in the spotlight. Bethany hasn't had to become a wrecking ball. You know what I'm saying? She hasn't had to go Miley Cyrus. Why? She would never do that. She knows who she is. She knows who she is before God. But you look at Hollywood, you look at these people, you look at the athletes, you look at the ones that don't have Christ, that put their value on this thing that is temporary and can change. You're a great football player, you get a wrong injury, you're done. Now, again, I don't know how much I want to go into football because group full of ladies. Anybody watch football in here? Ladies? Whoa! I didn't know there'd be so many football fans. I thought you guys had the Chargers in town. That's weird. Just kidding. 49ers fan, right? There's nothing to cheer about. But that's the deal. You're great, you're number one pick, you're awesome, you're supposed to do great, and you do horrible. What happens to your value? You're done. You can't base it on those things. You can't base it on the things that change, because that's the deal. Those things will change. And so you can be a Robin Williams, and you can make tons of movies and make tons of movies and make people all around the world, not just the US, all around the world laugh and cry with your movies. And then you end your own life. Why? Because you suffer with depression. Why? Because you always have to make that better movie. How are you going to top Miss Doubtfire? Well, now I got to go be a Patch Adams. How are you going to top a Patch Adams? Well, now I got to go do this. I got to do that. And at some point, the career declines, which means your worth declines. And before your career is completely out, you take yourself out. How many times have we seen that in Hollywood? I don't want to see that for any of you guys. How can I prevent that from happening? I can't. You can by going, that doesn't determine my worth, so I'm not gonna judge myself by that. And so that's the lie. That's the great lie. I like calling it the great lie. We have a great lie and we have a great truth. Great lie, your worth connected to circumstances, but those circumstances are constantly changing, and it doesn't matter. Achieve every single goal. Write out goals. Goals are great. Achieve every single goal, and you're just gonna have more. You won't be satisfied with those goals. But that's the great deception that we have. The other thing about a storm that's interesting is a storm, like my boy Google was telling me, it's a violent kind of thing, you know? And, you know, the storm of self-worth, I think it's brought on by this dude named Satan, because he doesn't really have he actually has too high of a self-worth. He thinks he's more than he really is, and he stood in front of God and said, like, hey, I'm gonna like take your position, your power, and do more than you. And God was like, really? Go out of here. And so he went, and he wants to take everybody out. God said that he created us in his own image and that he loves us and that we are very good. Guess what that makes us? Public enemy number one for Satan. So he's the master of this great deception. He's the one leading this great deception. And the strange thing about Satan is he's kind of like this abusive control freak. And I can connect because, prior to being a believer, I had that same kind of mindset. When you're an abusive control freak, what you want to do, not only do you want to destroy other people that aren't like you, but you want to get them to destroy themselves, because that's even better. If you can get somebody to destroy themselves and not even have to put much effort into it, that's great. You just get to sit back and watch your handiwork. That's what Satan does, which is why we all know that hurt people hurt people. Why do you think that is? You've got low self-worth. You think your worth is tied to your job, and then you get fired, and now you're making sandwiches at Subway. I'm sorry if any of you guys make sandwiches at Subway. I love it. Footlongs are amazing. In Hawaii, they're not $5. They're $7 footlongs. It's weird. Yeah, Little Caesars, $7 pizzas. Like, nothing's $5. Anyways, let's get back to what really matters in life. Where was I going? Pizzas, Subway, $5 foot. Okay, you lost your job. Now you're over at Subway and stuff like that. Now your life sucks. Every customer that comes in, how are you going to treat them? Welcome to Subway. What do you want? I'd like to get a foot long. Shouldn't you go with a 6-inch? You know what I'm saying? You're going to start blasting on people like, can I get the extra meat? You already have it. Like, what do? When you're in pain, what do? You want to bring everybody down with you. And the master of this great deception, this great lie, Satan, is sitting back going, that girl, do my work for me. Keep doing it. Because the more you drag them down, the more they're going to drag you down. It'll keep going down. And the best thing is that you'll be completely distracted from the one that actually loves you, the one that kicked me out of heaven. You won't be focused on him at all. And that's my goal. That's my job. Satan doesn't want to bring you to hell and party in hell. Satan doesn't want to ruin your life. All he wants to do is distract you from knowing who God said you are and distract you from knowing what God's done for you. If he can do that, he wins. The one thing he can't allow is for you to understand, I was created in God's image. God loves me. That's all that matters. Moving on. That's all you have to be able to do. And we're going to talk about that today. How can we do that? How do we escape the storm? And so you guys can all understand, have I painted a picture of the storm of self-worth and what it is? Anybody ever, none of you guys, because you guys are in a church, none of you guys have ever experienced this, but you probably know somebody, right? Oh, I have a friend, that maybe have done that one time. It was mean. We all know what this storm is like. How do we deal with it? I don't like saying, so that's a storm of self-worth, enjoy it, figure it out. No. How do we answer this question? How do we deal with these things? In order to escape the storm, what we need to do is get from that great deception to the great truth. And what I'm going to do for the majority of the rest of this talk is tell you what that great truth is and tell you how we know that it's actually true. And in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, this is the Apostle Paul, and he says, this is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior. Okay, well, what is it that's good? What is acceptable? And what does he desire? This is acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior, who desires all to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. God's desire is for all to be saved. That's the cross. Got that when I was 18 before I was a believer. Weird story. You're right? You're like, well, he was serious, and then he just went to a tangent. That's weird. Try being in here. God, who is the Savior, he desires for people to be saved, number one. And number two, he desires people to come into the knowledge of truth. That is the biggest thing. If you can come into the knowledge of the truth and not be deceived anymore, your life will forever change. And then if your life forever changes, you will have the desire to go out and rip the lie away from other people and give them the truth. And then Satan's pouting and God is cheering. And that's what I want to do, is bring you the truth today. You guys ready for a little bit of truth? No, that was mediocre. You guys want lies. You want deception. Okay. Shameless, right? He wants us to clap for him. He's weird. Okay. What is this great truth? What is this great truth? The great truth is this: the value that you have, every single one of you individually, your value is intrinsic. What that means is that your value is completely tied into nothing other than the fact that you exist. The fact that you were created gives you value. Big secret. There's the truth right there. The mere fact that you exist to listen to me, the mere fact that you exist to contemplate, am I worth anything, means that you exist. And if you exist, your worth is already tied up in that. And nothing's going to change it. Nothing's going to take it away. Nothing's going to add to it. There's nothing that you can do to add worth. There's nothing that you can do to take away worth. Understand that. Well, that's a pretty bold statement. You don't understand what's going on in my life. You don't understand what I've been through. You don't understand what I've had to experience. Okay, I've heard it before. God loves me. He thinks I'm worth something. Great. If I was worth something, why would these things have happened? Tough question. How do you deal with that? I say this: if God didn't love you, why would you even think that that was an issue, whatever it is that happened? Let's say it's a breakup. Let's go really light. I had a breakup with my boyfriend. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and if God loved me, we would be together forever. Those hickeys on your neck are the reason that God wants you to break up, first off. It's like all the moms are like, yes, preach, young man. Understand, I got to get water. I'm getting excited over here. I'm thinking of my daughter, and I was just, Okay, anyways. See, I messed myself up again. You've got the self-worth. And so you break it up, God doesn't love me anymore. This is what we need to understand. When people ever ask that question, well, this gnarly thing happened in my life, and usually it's a lot worse than a breakup. This gnarly thing happened, how could God possibly love me? You know how God loves you? He makes you understand that that thing was wrong. And I'm not talking about a breakup. I'm talking about hard stuff. I'm talking about I have cancer. I'm talking about my mom just died. I'm talking about real life issues that you go, if God loved me, if God loved people, why would this happen? If God didn't love you, he wouldn't build you in a way that you knew that that was wrong. If all God is this power-hungry lightning chucker from heaven that's just going, oh, I'm going to screw with that person now, I'm going to mess with that person now, he wouldn't put inside of you the innate ability to recognize, this is wrong, that person shouldn't have touched me like that. This is wrong, that person shouldn't have died. This is wrong, that relationship shouldn't have been broken. That's proof that God loves you, the fact that you can even think, wait, this is wrong. If he's this crazy God that doesn't love you, he's not going to put that in you. He's just going to make you be a little drone and do whatever you do. But he hasn't done that. How else do we know that God loves us, that we have worth, that we have value? I'm going to share 3 ways that we know. Looking at the Bible, 3 ways that we can see God clearly shows that our worth is built in him and not in anything else. And the first way is with creation. We're going to talk about creation, how that shows that we have worth. We're going to talk about Jesus' ministry. If you don't know Jesus, he's not like, your primo or primo. It's not like your Jesus. Jesus, God's son, God. When Jesus was on earth, when you read in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, when Jesus speaks, when Jesus does things, you understand that's God doing those things. So when he's having a conversation with somebody, you're going, I wonder what God would think if that person was talking to him like that. You don't have to wonder, just read it. It's there. So we're going to look at Jesus' ministry and what that says about our value, about our worth. And finally, we're going to look at Jesus' sacrifice. But to start from the very beginning, if you got a Bible, you can turn it right to the very beginning. You don't have to, though. But it's right there in Genesis. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates the world. Well, how does that show that we have value? Well, check out how he created the world. In 6 days, he created everything, right? First, he was like, let there be light, and he made the earth. He made the light. He made the stars. He made the sun so that we could have light. He made the waters. He put fish in the waters. He put birds in the air. He put animals on the land. That's animals. He put vegetation to grow up. He put all of those different things. And then on the very last day, after all of those things were already set, understand everything that God made before he made man and woman, he made to sustain man and woman. How do we know that we have value? Well, one, he says, let's go, let's make man, and I've made him in my own image. So male and female, we're made in the very image of God. He says that about nothing else in creation, nothing else. We get sad when lions get shot. We get sad when animals go extinct and things like that, and that's fine, that's stewardship. But understand, only humans are created in the image of God, and understand that he made us after everything else because he prepped all of that other stuff for us. Those of you that are moms, you found out that you're going to have a baby. Maybe you went and you got, you convinced your husband to go and get a bigger house with an extra room that was completely empty for 9 months, and you decorated it, and you made a nursery, and you made everything perfect and ready for when that baby came. Understand, before God created anybody, that's what he did with this world. And then he said, here you are, you're created in my image. And then he said, this is very good. Not only that, after he created the entire world and then stuck us in it, he said, now you, because you're created in my image, you know what you go get to do? You get to rule over everything. This is yours. Enjoy it. How do we know that we have value? God created man in his image. He created women in his image. And when he created us, he said in Genesis 1:27 and 28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Even though man wasn't created first, the greatest value of all creation was in man. That's who he created to rule over everything. Only man is created. Only people were created in God's image. And because of that, we know that we were created with the command to rule everything. We know that we have value. So that's just creation. Okay, fast forward from Genesis. That was the first book of the Old Testament. Now let's go, the Old. Let's go to the New Testament. Let's see Jesus' ministry. So we're going to fast forward about a whole lot of history. And now Jesus is on the scene. And Jesus is God walking on the earth. And what does he have to do in his ministry? I really like the book of John. Myself, I really like the book of John. I'm teaching it right now. We're going to cover a few things in the book of John. We're going to cover a few of the things that Jesus did, a few of the people that he talked to, some of the miracles that he did, and then we're going to kind of look back and go, well, who were these people, and why did God do these things? Because what we want to do is we want to determine, again, I said to you, our worth is tied in the fact that we're just merely created. Genesis tells us we were created in the image of God. That means we have worth. Well, how else are you going to prove that I have worth? Well, let's see what Jesus did with people. Let's see how he responded within people. In John chapter 2, you have Jesus' first miracle. He turns water into wine at a wedding. In John chapter 3, you have him talking to this guy named Nicodemus. And this guy, Nicodemus, was the leader of this group that was anti-Jesus. They didn't like Jesus. They didn't like what he was doing. But he still talked with this dude in chapter 3. In chapter 4, you see him speaking to this Samaritan woman at a well. And she had 3 things going for her that were like strike 1, 2, and 3. 1, she was a Samaritan, and Jews don't hang out with Samaritans. 2, she was a woman, and a good single Jewish dude wouldn't be talking to just a single girl. And 3, she was in sin. She admits openly that she's sleeping with somebody that's not her husband, and she's had 5 husbands before. And so 3 strikes, you're out. Jesus shouldn't be talking to her, but he talks to her. Finishing up in chapter 4, he heals this nobleman's son. This nobleman was like a royal official. His son is sick. Jesus heals him. In chapter 5, you see Jesus healing another man that was paralyzed for 38 years. In chapter 6, you see Jesus feeding 5,000 people. That's just the men, not including the women and the children. So it could have been up to 15,000 if there was a man and a wife and at least 1 child per person, but minimum of 5,000 people. In chapter 9, you see him healing a blind man from birth. And in chapter 11, you see his ultimate miracle other than his own resurrection when he raises a guy from the dead. So you tell me, okay, great, you're telling me about miracles. What does that have to do with me at all? Let's look. I told you I like digging in. Let's look at the different people that Jesus ministered to. I'm saying we have worth simply because we're created. I'm going to prove that by saying, look who Jesus ministered to. It wasn't because of anything they did. It wasn't because of anything they didn't do. It wasn't because of their money. It wasn't because they were just poor. It wasn't because they were great. Simply the fact that they were created. That's the only reason he's ministering to them. Again, in chapter 2, the water into wine. Why did he have to turn water into wine? Because they ran out of wine. Why did they run out of wine? Probably because they didn't have enough money to buy enough wine. So what does that tell us? Okay, Jesus ministers to the poor. That's not a hard stretch. We all know that. Jesus ministers to the poor. Great. What about Nicodemus? Nicodemus is one of Jesus' enemies. He's one of the guys that's of the group that later on will be the people that say, we need to crucify this man. And he meets with this guy and talks with him. He doesn't say, listen, Nick, I know that you came to me at night. Nick at night, I like that one. I know that you came to me at nighttime to talk about these things. Why don't you come during the day? Why don't you show your face in front of all of your little Pharisee friends, and then we can have a conversation? He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, listen, Nicodemus, I'm not going to talk to you until you renounce all of that stuff. He said, you want to come and talk to me about that? You want to know what I'm all about? Let's have a conversation right now. He didn't care where he was coming from. In chapter 4, when he's talking to that Samaritan woman, he didn't care what society said about this woman. He didn't care that society would go, whoa, you can't talk to even his own disciples. When they come back, they're like, what is he doing talking to a woman? What's he doing talking to a Samaritan? But it says they weren't bold enough to say anything to him. He didn't care what society thought. He understood, oh, there's a woman I created. I know that she's in sin. Probably the reason I need to be talking to her. In chapter 4, or later on in chapter 4, when he heals that official son, well, Jesus, he was only here for the poor and for the needy. This was a royal official. Jesus didn't tell him, like, look, dude, I'm only here for the poor people. Why don't you go and you have the money, go send your son to a doctor. He's like, okay, fine. Your faith has healed your son. You go back home. He's already healed. He came for the rich. He came for the poor. He came for the ones that society said, no, they're not valuable. They're not worthy. Stay away from them. That's not what Jesus believed. He heals this guy in chapter 5. This is a crazy story. He heals the guy. The guy's been paralyzed for 38 years. The guy jumps up. He's like, hey, Jesus is like, hey, do you want to get better? And the guy's like, yeah, but I can't. And Jesus is like, hey, just get up and take your mat and walk. And the guy's like, let me try that. Oh, that works. Okay, cool. So he walks off. Understand this, 38 years not being able to use your legs. It's not just like, oh, he fixed broken legs, muscles atrophied, never been used or hadn't been used for 38 years. Instantly, all of it healed. The guy gets up and then he goes, thank you, Jesus. No, he doesn't. The guy gets up and he walks off. And what's the first thing that he does? He walks off, and Nicodemus' homies, the Pharisees, are like, what are you doing walking, carrying a mat? That's illegal. It's the Sabbath day. You're not supposed to do that. This miracle happened right by the temple. These guys would have seen him laying on the ground for the last 38 years. They don't care about that. All they see is, you're carrying a mat? How dare you? It's the Sabbath. Why are you doing this? And the first thing the guy can possibly say, the guy that healed me told me to do it. He rats Jesus out. Did Jesus know he was going to rat him out? Did he care? Didn't care, still healed him. Why? Because he was created, because he loved him. You go into John chapter 6, and he feeds the 5,000 people. And after he feeds the 5,000 people, it says that he knew that they wanted to come and make him king, and so he withdrew. And then the next day, they come and they find them, and they say, hey, Jesus, there you are. We've been looking for you. And he calls them out. He's like, look, you're not looking for me. You're looking for bread. You're looking for miracles. You're looking for liver quivers. You're looking for good feelings. You don't care about me. You care about yourselves. That's the only reason you're here. If you really care about me, guess what? You're going to have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they're like, what? We're not in it for that. And they all skedaddle. But guess what that means? He already knew what their hearts were. He didn't sit there and go, man, there's 5,000 people. They're hungry, but they don't really care about me, so forget it. They can go to Subway. He didn't do that. Still fed every single one of them, right? Then you go into John chapter 9. He heals this blind man. I love it. He heals the blind man. They go, they call him, they say, you got healed. How did this happen? He's like, there was this man. I think his name was Jesus. Sometimes we get this picture, well, Jesus heals the poor and the broken spirit and those that have this ultimate amount of faith. This dude didn't even know who Jesus was. He obviously never saw him, but he's like, I think his name was Jesus, and he just told me to do this, so I went, and then I got healed from it. A guy that didn't even know who he was, that had been born his entire life, he was blind. And then ultimately in chapter 11, when he raises Lazarus, this is a big deal. He finds out the sisters, Mary and Martha, they send some messengers to Jesus. Hey, Jesus, our brother's sick. Come. And he's like, okay, I'll come. And he waits 2 days. And you're like, why did he wait 2 days? That's weird. Then he goes and he shows up. And on his way in, one of the sisters hears Jesus is coming, and she comes out to him and she says, Lord, if you had only come sooner, you could have stopped him from dying. And then he goes and talks to the other sister, and she says, Lord, if you had only come sooner, you could have stopped him from dying. So he's like, okay, yeah, I could have stopped him. You guys believe that? That's great. But then when he tells the first sister, when he says, hey, don't you understand I'm the resurrection and the life? Don't you understand I can raise your brother up? She says, I totally believe it. I know you can raise him in the last day. I might ruin this story for a lot of you guys, but in chapter 11 of John, when he raises Lazarus, Martha didn't have this amazing amount of faith. You're going to raise my brother. If she did, why, when he says, take that stone away, would she say, no, it's been 4 days. He already stinks. She had no faith that he was going to raise her brother up that day. Didn't believe it. In the last days, when everybody dies and gets resurrected, totally. Right there, she didn't have the faith of that. She didn't know that. I love the King James Version in this because it says, Lord, no, he stinketh. And I just like the way that sounds. In newer translations, it's like, don't open it, it stinks. Why would it stink? Because he's decayed. What does that mean? His body's breaking down. What does that mean? He's good and stinky and dead. That's the reason why Jesus waited a couple of days to come back. He wanted to make sure dude was good and dead so that his power could be shown. But what does that show in chapter 11? What do we know about these people? Who did he minister to? A poor groom, a leader of his enemies, a woman that society said, don't do anything with her, a rich man, a guy that was going to be thankless and rat him out, 5,000 people that could care less about him. They only wanted what he could give. They wanted that spiritual ATM. A blind guy that didn't even know who he was, and 2 sisters and a man. The whole like, well, if you have enough faith, you'll be healed. I don't think Lazarus' faith got him healed. He was dead. Just, throwing it out there. It wasn't his faith. It wasn't the faith of his sisters because they basically told him to stop. Move the stone, I'll raise them up. No, don't. Like, stop it. Here, raise. It wasn't because of their faith. So that makes me go, well, why would he minister to all of those people? What is it that they had? Nothing other than the fact that they were created in the image of God, and that's why he loved him. Genesis, you were created in the image of God. You have value more than anything else that's ever been created. The whole ministry of Jesus, when God is on earth talking to people, who's he talking to? Who's he ministering to? Everybody from every spectrum. Why? Because they were all created. That's the one thing they all had in common. Nothing else that they all had in common, except for that, the fact that they were created. And the third thing, the most obvious verse to show that we have value is in John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever should believe in him wouldn't perish, but have everlasting life. It's always brutal when you're a pastor and you're like, I have to remember John 3:16 because I didn't write it down in my notes, but okay, we're good. What do we know from that one verse? There's a few different things that we see from that one verse. What do we see from the beginning? For God so loved the world. Well, why did God love the world? Genesis 1 says he created it. It seems he loves the world simply because he created it. What else do we know in there? God so loved the world. Well, how did he prove he loved the world? What was he willing to do? He was willing to give his only son for the one that he created, for the ones that he created, for you and me. God loves his creation. He loves his son. For God so loved the world that he created, that he gave his only begotten son. Why did he give his son? Because he loved the world so much. How do we quantify our value? How do we quantify our worth? Are we worth $6 like a bottle of water? Are we worth a long hike? You know what we're worth? God's very blood, his son. You know who's qualified to tell you what you're worth? The one that created you. You know who's not qualified? Anybody, anything else. Stop believing the great deception. You now know the great truth. Simply the fact that you're created, that you live, that you breathe, that you exist, that means you have value. And that's the only thing that shows that you have value. We know that Jesus saved us before we did anything. Thankless guy. People that were only in it for themselves. Random people that Jesus is helping. Why? Simply because they were created. It wasn't water into wine. Hey, Jesus, if you turn the water into wine, we'll pay you extra. Nope. The groom and the bride didn't even have any idea what even happened in that miracle. Lazarus, hey man, like, please just raise our brother. We know you can do it. Nope, didn't even have the faith. The only reason he did any of that, simply because they were created, and he loves his creation. So what did he do? He made that sacrifice so that those that believe in the Son would be able to go, wait a minute, I have this value? He showed that I have this value. What value do I have? The very life of God, the very blood of God, that's the value that I have? Yeah, I want to be with the guy that's completely obsessed with me to the point that he would die for me. I'm in a room full of ladies. How many of you guys don't want a husband that's willing to die for you? Well, guess what? The one that created you, not only was he willing to, he did die for you. And check this out. 2,000 years ago, before any of you guys checked off anything on your good list or had to scratch anything off or try to erase anything off your bad list, before you even existed, he already did it because he knew you would be created. He already knew what your heart would be, and he loved you from the very beginning. Understand the great truth. Genesis shows that we're made in God's image, we're created, he loves us more than anything else because he gives us dominion. Jesus' ministry shows us that it has nothing to do with anything you could possibly do. Your worth is just tied up in the fact that you were created. And John 3:16, his sacrificial death, the only reason that he died on that cross was because he loves you. He wants you to be with him for all eternity. He knew there's only one way to do that, which was his sacrifice, and he did it. And so how do we deal with the storm of self-worth? What do? It's really simple. You remember that God created you. You remember that he gave you dominion over all of creation. He said that the creation was very good. That includes you, right? Understand that Satan hates God. Satan wants to pervert all of that. Because you're loved by God, you're, again, Satan's public enemy number one. So he's going to throw out that big deception. That's the storm of self-worth. How do you escape from that storm? Number one, you got to gain control of your senses. When you're driving in that car and that storm's going nuts and you're trying to figure out, and you're doing this one right there with the windshield wipers, you just got to calm down and go like, wait a minute, hold on, let me think. I know what this freeway is like. I know what this street is like. This is crazy. Let me just slow down. Let me just start going 40 instead of continuing to go 80. That's a rational decision. You have to gain control of your senses and not allow yourself to be distracted with all the junk in the world. I wish I had... Is where we don't... Oh, man. Dude. That was like the great illustration, and now I got to redo this. Some people are afraid of thunder. I'm afraid of my thunder getting stolen, and it just did. Humbling experience. No, real talk though, like, big hand for the audio guys. I do this at my church. When the you know how hard it is to know what a speaker, where they want their slide to be, and you're like trying to mind read, and then they change, and they're like, you didn't know I was going to change my... These dudes, they're working hard, I promise you. Don't just be like, why are there creepy guys back here videoing us? Like, that's their job, leave them alone. Anyways, focus, I was getting serious. Regain control of your senses. Don't allow yourself to be distracted by your microphone turning off or by the noise of the world. Understand the dangers of the storm. If you understand the dangers of the storm, then you'll be prepared for it. I live in Hawaii. We have hurricane season. When it happens, we're like, how close is it going to be? Is it like 2 days away? Okay, I guess I should go get a generator or something. You prepare for the storm so it won't be a big deal once it hits. This is the big one, don't fool yourself into believing the Great Deception. What's the Great Deception? The Great Deception, we're going to do interactive. The Great Deception is believing that somebody can give you your worth. Who's the only person qualified to give you your worth? Okay, good. You know the great truth. Don't believe the Great Deception. Don't believe anything else. Nothing else determines your worth because all of it will fail you. You'll never achieve it. Even if you do, you're just going to have to keep going higher. Don't believe that. God made you. He loves you. He died for you. Understand that. That's why he gets to tell you what you're worth, because he proved what you were worth when he died for you. So remember your eternal value. The last thing that I can say, don't add to the noise for other people. Don't be part of the storm. It's really cute to just, oh, well, Satan, he brings that storm. Guess who he uses? Us. When we're going, you shouldn't get that 12-inch, you should get the 6. No double meat for you, you've already got. When we're doing stuff like that, we're adding to the storm. Don't do it. Don't add to the deception, add to the truth. When you see, just like Kayla was saying, when you see somebody sitting in that corner, you can probably already assume they've got low self-worth. They must not know the truth. And so you walk over and you go like, hey, did you know that God died for you? And they're like, what did you just say to me? And you're like, you might have to duck. It's okay. Just, learn how to do that. But share the truth with them, ladies. There's some of you in this room that already knew this. You're like, this was all review. I already knew God loved me. There's some in this room that had no idea. There's some in this room that still don't believe it. Those of you that know, share with those that don't. Those of you that don't, look at me and hate me all you want. But if you want to come and tell me your story of how you know that God doesn't love you, I would love you to. Bring it on. Challenge, right? Okay. I think now we're going to release you guys for lunch, but my wife's probably...